stars tonight. Fields grow anew with the spring of life. In this sheath of truth will I wrap myself tight. The landscape, it goes for miles. The myths of old, they breathe in me life.
Hi, Jackie Major question. What led to your decision to begin teaching the tarot deck? Can you speak more about these tools? I've been doing classes from my mystery school since 98 or 99. It was one of the first things I did professionally. Did them in person, which means having a class at a center or a healing center or at somebody else's house, whatever, 10, 15 people come over. Did this for a series of years, both in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and then finally Seattle. And then when, because of the Atlantis book and other things, I got to travel more and had to focus more on those other subjects. Couldn't really do the classes anymore. So then we moved it online. It already had to be in the mystery school since about 2000. I think even before that, but then we just moved the material wholesale right on the net and did the classes that way. But in 2000 I was invited to write a series of articles on the major arcana for a Bay Area magazine. That proved to be very successful, and basically what you're seeing in The Path of the Fool is that script. So we're talking 14 years ago, so I've been trying to take it out of the drawer for a long, long time. But I like to do things when the time is right. And but the vast majority of the material that you're hearing, was seeded then. It was written then in those articles. The articles that actually ended up in the magazine were edited down just for space. So I had the originals, which were quite a bit longer. And as I say, those were just sitting there. And I thought about putting it into a book, but that didn't seem quite right because it's so eclectic. And now we've got YouTube, we've got the ability to do it that way, so it was a perfect opportunity to do that. As to the tools, well, and as to why, well, I mean, the tarot is an enormous encyclopedia symbolically, so one should get into it. It's not just a simple divination tool in that sense. There's a lot more going on in the tarot you could possibly imagine, and it helps us to synthesize psychology, sociology, philosophy, Hermetic science, Gnosticism, mysticism, anything you can think of is geometry, sacred geometry, etymology, numerology, all of that. But the real reason to touch upon the tarot more than, say, astrology or whatever is because it works with the symbols, and that's going to open the right brain, which in our world today is shut down, hardly working at all, except maybe in a dream state, and even then it's quite traumatized and weak. And so our humanity at this time is being forced into a very left brain modes of cognition, and it's part of the reason why things, why there's a state of decay. Something needs to be done about it, But if you're going to do something about it, then better dive into the deepest part of it. Now, symbols are being used on us on a constant, on a negative basis constantly. That's what I talk about in the symbolic literacy or in the subversive use of sacred symbolism programs that I've done. So if we want to offset all of that barrage of negativity that's coming symbolically at us, we need to strengthen that part of our minds and get aware of it. Because the moment that you are aware of it, actually, the damage stops. So it's very necessary, especially for children. And then on a much more deeper, profound level, when you open cognition to the whole brain, when the whole brain starts working with you, which involves a lot of intuitive and imaginative processes, you're not only getting the psychic immunity we just spoke about, but you may be now in a position to commune with the wisdom body, which is going to then give you answers to the more pesky philosophical questions that has plagued the academics, that plagues the religiously minded. These are the greater metaphysical questions, and one way of answering those is by going to books and reading what others have said. I'm not negating that, but the ultimate way is to go within the self and to do that, you have to open those doors. So the tarot provides keys that open the door of the inner chambers of intelligence and wisdom, of ancestral, archaic knowledge, this sort of an inner scriptorium where very archetypal modes of thinking exist, which are not being used in the daily, utilitarian, in our practical day-to-day existence. They may not be needed. But when it comes to thinking about the bigger questions of time and freedom and God and existence and what have you, well then, this pragmatic kind of intelligence is just not going to cut it. So we have to open up a dialogue with something much deeper. But again, thanks for that question. I hope you enjoy The Path of the Fool, because it really is a masterclass in symbolism. And Chris, he writes, why or how did Pluto enter into this astrological lexicon when doing charts? The planet was only discovered in 1930, so what do we think of that? And maybe even other these dwarf planets that are being included in astrology. Well, the thing is that my form of astrology doesn't bother, so I'm not really the one to answer this, because my form of astrology that I've invented or practiced doesn't have anything to do with the external planets anyway, except as metaphors for psychic happenings. But Pluto was brought in just simply because at the time when Pluto, the planet, was discovered, there were so many seismic things going on Earth. The outbreak of Second World War. Sigmund Freud developed his theories and wrote his book, The Interpretation of Dreams, I think it is, around that time. So there was quite a phase shift in culture, and some pretty titanic things happening. And so in astrology, only Mars had been given these attributes. So the astrologically minded started to realize that actually that doesn't really fit. So the discovery of a new planet, just as it had happened before with Herschel's discovery of Uranus, planet Uranus, it's just a simple habit, just in the same way that you can have a particular sportsman added to a soccer team, or any his tricks, his skill, his style really it makes a paradigm shift for the game, right? As Ronnie O'Sullivan is a snooker player, the game has changed from when it was by the addition of one guy, right? Same way with somebody like Pele or George Best in soccer, everyone trudging along thinking that, all the rules was pretty much not going to change, but then one character, one stereotype, his skill becomes an archetype that then is emulated by everybody else, commented on by everybody else, and then changes the lexicon. So in some way, that can work. It's a signal working both ways. Now, I'm a big believer in psychologizing. I think that it is things that are noticed in the human world then gets projected outwards on the planets, or gods even, for that matter. So the new things that were happening, man's new modes of consciousness, society's new configuration, around about the turn of the century. We're just passed through a world war. Other one was brewing. So Pluto as a planet got associated with a lot of these new traits and motifs, and it's just the way it is. I guess if we find some other planet, the process can go on. In the symbolic lexicon, there can be endless stereotypes representing archetypes. There's no need for a limitation on it at all. So moving to Lynn Murdoch, her question. Michael, you've talked a lot in the past about psychic cleansing and how it's a lost practice, something that we no longer have access to in the same way since the persecution of the shaman and other elders. Is there a way of cleansing that you would say is closest to how it should be done? Or is it an individual process that will change or adapt for each person? Is it an internal or external process? By that I mean, do we learn to do it ourselves, or should we be more safely and correctly done by someone with the right training? To me, it also relates to geomancy, the power of place. How much do you think that geographical places we inhabit affect us? And is it our responsibility to cleanse them too? Yeah, I've gone into that latter part extensively in the Atlantis book about the role that geomancy plays. I'm a big believer in it. Big believer in Feng Shui, big believer in Vastu, the Indian version, and just geomancy in general, because it's all part of our Merkaba. We are part of the planet's part of us, and that should show in the way you live, in your room, in your home, and hopefully in your neighborhood. Always remembering that there's things we just simply don't have power over, so you're not going to be able to control every single aspect of your environment, but certainly you have control over your body, you have control over your house, your belongings, that kind of thing. So do the best you can. Never become obsessed with these things, because that in itself then becomes another problem. You know, you're trying to remedy a thing and then you end up making the thing worse. But doing it as an interesting study will entail learning from other people, right? The giants upon whose shoulders we stand. There's no question about that. So in everything we do, we first turn to those who've done it before and maybe done it better. So learn from them. And then down the line, as part of that process continues, there's a natural, organic point where we start adding something of our own. And this is perfectly good. So there's no reason to debunk what others have said, what others have done. It's just that if you continue to walk in those footsteps year after year without adding anything of your own, then that's a bit bizarre, isn't it? I mean, even in an academic school, you're not permitted to do that. Even in class, they want you, when you write your paper, to say, here's what I've learned from other people, but there's a part for me. That's essential, and if you don't put that part in, what your own ideas are, you fail, or you get a much lower mark, right? So what's the difference with any other area of life? Learn what others have done, take from them, learn from them, honor them, and then move on. You know, Leonardo da Vinci himself said that the greatest pupil is the one who actually surpasses the master. And that's what all great teachers want for their pupils, is that they grasp what is happening and are able to move on. But the idea is then that you maybe have to take that knowledge, synthesize it for the new age. You know, the children, the kids, you know, they're not going to be able to read these Victorian books. They're not going to be able to read the old Shakespearean language. They're not going to be able to read 600-page tome. You know, but they would maybe read a 100-page tome, or they would get it if you explained it in the vernacular, in the idioms of the time. And that's what I do with my work, and I'm all for that. I think that's a good thing. You don't dumb it down. You certainly don't want to dumb it down, but you want to meet them halfway so that their minds can connect. Curious minds can say, yeah, I get the picture. There's either order or there's disorder, and I like order. You know, but what's happening now is that the forms of order that are being imposed on the human race are draconian forms of order. They're obsessive compulsive forms of order through parents and through, you know, peers and all of that. So even the concept of order now, and why you'd want things to be in order or clean or given their proper due is also becoming corrupted, becoming ruined. So you see a lot of order, but is it really organic order, or is it some sort of draconian order? But these are traditions, what you're talking about are traditions that have an ancient past, and just because of that, they need to be preserved. So the question of whether we should or should not do it or preserve it is a moot point. Yes, something that's been around for 10,000 years, yes, you can spend a bit of time to brush it up, you know, get rid of the debris, continue it, become a teacher of it so that you can pass it on. That's our duty as we are as humans. That's ontological, is to pass on the great traditions of the past. There should be no question about it at all. But when it comes to the question, what you're hinting at in your question here is whether or not in the final analysis it should be a personalistic kind of process. And the answer to that is absolutely yes. In fact, you'll find out that the cleansing won't even happen unless it turns out to be personalistic. The other stuff will be topical, yeah, it'll be good. You can share it with others to a degree. But when it really comes to the profound levels of, work, it has to be on a contemplative level. Because remember, only you know where your imperfections are. Only you know of internal blocks. How can anybody know? What's that thing in the Bible? You can't take the splinter out of the eye of another person until you take the plank out of your own. So, other people can help to a degree, but haven't they got their own issues? So in the end, it becomes axiomatic. It's perfectly logical and consistent to know that each person must do their thing their own way. And I would even accentuate that. I think it's essential for people to invent their own yogas, just in the way you sit down and invent on a musical instrument your own tunes. And if you have the means and the wealth, then even to be thinking in terms of inventing your own forms of architecture and all the way up the ladder. But just start humbly and try to get in contact with yourself your own way, and let your own being guide you into what kinds of healings are necessary. And not everybody's sick, you know, in the same way. So what works for one person may not work for another. So to a point, it's good, it's healthy to have interchange and sharing of ideas. But actually, everything has become so homogenized that in the end, we really do need to change that and start thinking in extremely idiosyncratic ways. You know, ideographic ways is the more technical word when it comes to these things you're talking about. But see, it's the same thing in Orthodox life, actually, if you think about it. You know, a great concert pianist is expected to not only have mastered all the techniques of the ones who came before him, and he is ultimately playing on an instrument made by somebody else. But what really makes him the genius, the master of masters, is that there's those little sprinkles of individuality. If he doesn't have that, then he's some sort of machine, which most of these classical musicians actually are at this point. They're just machines. They have no individual voice at all. As a matter of fact, they're not even doing the first part really well. They're not even emulating the guys who went before them. They're not playing those pieces actually as those people wrote. So there's a violation happening there already. Not to mention that they don't put any their own individualism in. But in a perfect world, right, you would be trying to do justice to what the men before you have created, and then you have that nailed, and then you add a little flourish, little accent. If you're an opera singer or whatever, that's saying, I honor the past, but I'm adding my own touch. It's the same in every other aspect of life.
My brother could use a little mercy now. He's a stranger to freedom. He's shackled to his fears and his doubts.
You see? So we've got, you know, let's hold a mirror up to both sides and ask from the domestic to the corporate level, are women happy with the freedom that they got? Don't you know that the Illuminati periodically hand you a carrot in order to keep you from exploding? I don't know a woman today who knows that. They think that their newfound freedom and their so-called, you know, modicum of sexual and social freedom that they got, you know, they're crying out, thinking it's a great thing. It was an award. It was a privilege, just like the driving license is a privilege, pal. They can take it away as fast as they can give it to you. Or they might give it to you for duplicitous reasons, so that now you go buck mad. They know that a person like a third world country that's been held under a third world status for years, the moment that you give it a few refrigerators and some Coca-Cola, just watch them go berserk. Well, it's the same on every level. Give a modicum of freedom to somebody who's been held down for centuries and watch them go apeshit as what's happening. This is how things happen. Does that mean it's good? Does it mean that you're helping society, helping the world, helping civilization? Of course not. What you become is a malignant version of femininity. You become a malignant version of masculinity. Today, the words masculine and feminine, just like the word virgin and many other words I deal with, these talismanic terms, is probably the most abused terms. How can you know what masculinity is when its mirror is malignant? How can you know what true femininity is when its mirror is malignant? So we have had homework to do. Both male and females today have to step out of the objective, you know, from a studious point of view, step out objectively from the roles that they've inherited and start asking bigger questions about who they are on the canvas of greater life. Because all of our civilizations are crumbling. And man is responsible for that, and so is women. And both genders have to look into their psyche to find out what are the hidden aspects, what are they contributing to, what are they responsible for, what are they guilty of, and what should they be proud of. And in this work, which you could call psychological or whatever, I just call it spirit work. It's the work of spirit, to find out who and what you are on an existential level, and then after you find that out, move out, you know, to the world. But this homework has to be done, because it'll be imbalanced if only one small group do it.
Every living thing could use a little mercy